All right. So what is e-invoice? Okay, so e-invoice is a digital representation of a transaction between a supplier and a buyer. Okay, e-invoice replaces the paperless and the electronic document such as a normal paper invoice and a credit note or even debit note. Okay, so e-invoice contains the same essential information like the traditional invoice. Okay, include suppliers and the buyer details, item description, the quantity, okay, prices include the tax and prices exclude the tax, and so on. All right, which record the transaction data for daily business activity. So basically, e-invoice is in a digital format. All right, it's not the paper, like the traditional paper invoice. Okay, so this is what I mean by e-invoice. So the e-invoice is supposed to be in the format of XML and JSON. All right, so does it mean that, let's say you generate the invoice into the PDF format, into the Microsoft Word format, or even JPEG and email to your customer is considered e-invoice. All right, so it's not. So e-invoice is supposed to be in a computer language, in an XML format and a JSON format. This is what I mean by that. By looking at it, ordinary people, maybe like me and you, might not be able to understand, but the computer can understand. Okay, this is a computer language. So what me and you, the ordinary people, can understand is like this. Okay, this is one of the example that the bill from a TMB. Okay, so moving forward, let's say when you're getting the bill, you will be able to see the QR code at the center. Can you see that? The QR code at the center. Okay, so when you scan the QR code, you will be able to see your details in the QR. All right, so your name, the address, okay, and was it the status of this invoice, was it been validated by the IRB or not? Okay, you will be able to see that in the QR. Okay, all right, so what is the benefits to adopt the e-invoice? Does it bring any benefit to your company? Of course, it's yes. So first thing is to reduce the manual effort and the human error. Okay, a unified invoice process through creation and the submission of a transaction documents and data electronically to the IRB. Okay, so for the moment right now, okay, currently, how do you issue invoice? You have an account clerk in the company to issue the invoice, right? Whether key into system or even manual handwriting. So in this situation, always we will have a manual error, okay, human error. So maybe the quantity wrong, okay, maybe the decision wrong. So moving forward with e-invoice, then you will cut down this error, okay? So you will prepare this invoice in the system, and then you will send it to the IRB for checking and validation. So the IRB will check on it, IRB will validate it, okay? Next, streamline the operation efficiency, okay? So how do you streamline the operation efficiency in your company? So with e-invoice, moving forward, so how do you send out the invoice? Okay, so you will send out the invoice from your system to your customer system, okay? So you will cut down the time, it will cut down the cost. So later we will talk about it again. Next, to facilitate your tax return filing, okay? Seamless system integration for the efficient and accurate tax reporting. So I'll take one example. So our individual filing, so we have a tax relief. We can claim a tax relief. So let's say I claim how do I claim my lifestyle relief? So for example, if I purchase my laptop, if I purchase a mobile phone, I will get the bill, okay? And then I will calculate the figure, I will put in as a tax relief, right? After that, I will have to keep this bill for 7 years. In case in the future, IRB conduct audit, then I will have to present to them the bill, okay, on my relief claim, right? So moving forward, let's say if I buy a mobile phone from a supplier, okay, I will get them to issue me an e-invoice. All right, I get them to issue me an e-invoice. So with that, IRB already have the data of my purchase, okay? The moment the e-invoice created and then sent to the IRB for validation, IRB will capture the data, okay? So IRB already have the data of my purchases and they will automatically fill in the column for us, all right? So moving forward, I do not need to still keeping the document for 7 years. Okay, so it is the process of tax filing. All right. So last, digitalize the tax and financial reporting. Okay, moving forward, all our purchases and all our sales or even expenses, all right, will be captured by the e-invoice. Okay, so with that, IRB will be able to have all our data, okay, to match the industry standard for them. All right. So transformation into e-invoice era. So how do we transform from the current paper invoice, okay, or invoice in PDF into the e-invoice? Okay, so currently before the e-invoice, so many businesses still in Malaysia are still sending out or receive the invoice by using paper or even PDF through the email, okay, which require many steps and also many challenging. Okay, let's look at the paper invoice. How do we issue paper invoice currently? So first, we have our account receivable to prepare the invoice. After that, he or she will print out and put it into the envelope and post it. All right. So your customer will receive the invoice, will receive a letter, okay, and then their account clerk will do the data key in into the system, then link it to account payable to make payment for you. All right. This is how we do now. Or even if it's the invoice in a PDF, okay, the account receivable will issue the invoice. All right, prepare it and generate the invoice into a PDF format. After that, email it to your customer. Your customer account clerk will do the same thing. Okay, data key in, will key in the invoice into the system and link to account payable. This is how we do currently. So it involves even 9 steps or 7 steps that you can see from the screen. Okay, with that, there is many challenge. Okay, include the manual key in for the invoice data, labor intensive, so you need the clerk to sit up and key in, costly, and also not secure. Not secure in the sense that there might be error making. Okay, time consuming. You post the invoice to your customer in need time. Okay, it takes a couple of days or even weeks to reach your customer. Okay, and you cannot be traced whether was this letter being sent to your customer reach their hand, or even was this email being sent out to your customer, or it go to junk mail or even rejected by the recipient. So not traceable. Okay, moving forward, e-invoice for the business digitalization will address all the challenge that I mentioned just now, all right, by automating the sending and receiving of e-invoice process in a system-to-system manner. All right, this is how it works. This is what I mean by system-to-system manner. So first thing, you have your account receivable to prepare the e-invoice in the system, okay, to key in. After that, the moment he or her to press the enter, okay, send out the invoice to IRB for validation, and it will be sent out immediately to your customer as well. All right, so your customer will be able to receive and process the invoice in their accounting system. So this is what I mean by system-to-system manner. So you will send out from your accounting system to their accounting system, okay, and link to account payable. All right. So e-invoice is an exchange of electronic invoices in an integrated and structured data format. Okay. So you will send out from your system to their system in the data format that I showed you just now. Okay, the computer language. All right. So then they will capture it. So the exchange of e-invoice in a system-to-system manner without the manual data key in. So without need to print out, without need to posting, and then without your customer have to re-key in again into their system. So will be from your system sent to their system. Okay. All right. Next, who will be involved in the e-invoice? Basically, all the individual and the legal entity are required to comply with the e-invoice requirement. Includes association, okay, body of person, a branch, a trust, cooperative society, a corporation, a Sanjam Berhad, okay, LLP, limited liability partnership, you have to do e-invoice as well, okay, partnership, a trust fund, a property trust, real estate investment fund, all these are subject to e-invoice, okay, a rep office, a regional office, you have to do e-invoice as well. So basically, the scenario that requires e-invoice to be issued. Why do we need to issue e-invoice? Okay, why do we need to issue e-invoice? First thing, of course, is as a proof of income for the company. Okay, you need the invoice to prove as a proof of your income for the company. Okay, so issue whenever a sales or other transaction is made to recognize the income of the taxpayer, okay, of a company. All right, and then the next, you need to issue a tax e-invoice, or you need to receive a e-invoice as a proof of expenses. Okay, in order for the IRP to get a tax deduction for your expenses for the company, you need an e-invoice. All right, it covers the purchases made, it covers other spending, which is expenses for the taxpayer. It includes those return or discount, okay, by the taxpayer. So the last is to capture the foreign transaction. The taxpayer must issue a self-bill e-invoice to document the expenses from other supplier which do not use the Malaysia My Invoice system. Okay. All right. So for the foreign transaction, let's say you have a purchases or you even have sales to the foreigner, okay, the foreign entity. So they are not subject to Malaysia e-invoice system. So they were not able to give you an e-invoice. Therefore, in this situation, you need to have a self-bill e-invoice for yourself. Okay. Later we will talk more on the self-bill e-invoice on the later slide. All right. So to assist the supplier in compliance with e-invoice requirement and to reduce the burden of both supplier and also the purchaser, so IRB allowed the supplier to do a consolidated invoice, okay, to consolidate all the transactions with the buyer into a consolidated e-invoice on a monthly basis. Okay, so IRB allowed the buyer to do a consolidated e-invoice on a monthly basis. Later we will talk about on the consolidated e-invoice again. Okay, so this is the situation that you need to do the e-invoice. Include B2B, the business to business operation, the B2C, business to consumer operation. Of course, the last is the business to government, the B2G. Okay, so e-invoice apply to all taxpayer undertaken commercial activity in Malaysia. So this is very important, you see. E-invoice apply to all the taxpayer who have doing commercial activity, who are doing business in Malaysia. So in other words, the taxpayer who is not doing business in Malaysia is not required to do e-invoice. All right, so I repeat. So e-invoice apply to all the taxpayer who are doing business in Malaysia. Okay, so for those who are not doing business in Malaysia, they do not require e-invoice. I give an example. Let's say for myself, I'm under employment, so I do not conduct business. Okay, so let's say I have a property, I have a shop lot, and then I rent out to other business owner. Okay, every month when the business owner pay me rental, so he or her might ask me for the e-invoice. All right, but because I myself is not conducting business, therefore I will not require to issue e-invoice. Okay, because I'm not conducting business, so I do not issue e-invoice to them. All right, so e-invoice flow for B2G will be similar to B2B, basically more or less the same. Okay, the next, so e-invoice will be issued to B2C upon the request of the taxpayer. That means for the B2C, business to the end consumer, let's say if you are selling to the end consumer, let's say if they do not ask you for the e-invoice, so you may not need to give them. So you just need to continue your current practice, giving out the receipt, things like that. Okay, will do. So for B2C or maybe certain B2B transaction where the e-invoice is not required by the buyer, so the buyer do not ask you for the e-invoice, you just need to issue the receipt, okay, to the buyer will do based on your current business practice. All right. So after a certain period, so supplier will need to require to aggregate the receipt issued to the buyer and send out the consolidated e-invoice to the IRB for the validation. Okay, after a period, which is 1 month. So you need to compile your receipts and send out the consolidated e-invoice to the IRB for the validation. All right, next. Who is exempted for implementing e-invoice? Who is not supposed to do e-invoice? No need to do e-invoice. So you can see from the screen, basically it covered Agong, Sudan, okay, our government, state government, local authority, and things like that. Okay, do not need to issue e-invoice, it's exempted. Okay, individual who are not conducting business is also exempted. I mentioned just now. All right, individual who do not do business, you do not need to issue e-invoice. The last bullet, you look at it, highlighted in red color. Taxpayer with an annual turnover or revenue of less than 150,000 in a year is exempted. All right. So for the taxpayer or maybe the micro SME, okay, their turnover is less than 150,000 in a year. They do not need to do e-invoice. Okay, it's fully exempted. All right. So all these are the example that you do not need to do in e-invoice. First thing, employment income is not subject to e-invoice, so you do not need to do e-invoice. Pension, okay, any money from your ex-spouse, you do not need to issue e-invoice, okay. Distribution of dividend, zakat, buy and sell securities, and also share disposal, whether inside or outside Malaysia, okay, for the share for the company not listed in the stock exchange. So you do not need to do e-invoice. Okay, so this is an example that I mentioned just now, the micro SME with an annual turnover less than a threshold of 150,000 is not required to issue e-invoice. So look at the first box. So Tina purchased 50 boxes of kueh from Masjid Rosa for her company meeting. So company that is a meeting, so they need a refreshment. Therefore, Tina purchased a kueh from Masjid Rosa, okay, at the roadside. So Tina requests a e-invoice from Masjid Rosa at the point of sales. So Masjid Rosa can issue a handwritten receipt to Tina, okay. Masjid Rosa, because the business turnover is below the threshold, okay, less than 150,000. Therefore, she is not required to issue an e-invoice, okay. Below the threshold, the micro SME, then they do not need to issue an e-invoice. Okay, so type of e-invoice. So there's total how many types? You look at the screen, you can see there's total of 8 types of e-invoice that you need to bear in mind. First is a invoice, okay, and the self-bill invoice. So credit note and a self-bill credit note, debit note and a self-bill debit note, and the last is refund notes and the self-bill refund notes. Okay, so invoice. So as all of us know, invoice is a commercial document to itemize and record a transaction between a seller and a buyer. Okay, include the issues of a self-bill e-invoice to get documented as expenses. All right. Next, credit note. So credit note issued by the supplier to correct the error, apply discount, or account for the return in the previous issued e-invoice. Okay, for the purpose of reduce the value of original e-invoice. That means, let's say originally you have already issued an e-invoice, but there is a return, okay, return of goods. Therefore, you will issue a credit note on that to reduce the value of the original e-invoice. Okay, so next, debit note. So a debit note is issued to indicate the additional charges on the previous issued e-invoice. Okay, so you can see debit note and credit note is the other way around. So credit note is to reduce the value of the original invoice, but debit note is to increase the value, okay, additional charges on the previous original e-invoice. In most circumstances, you will have a debit note. Okay, maybe your stock, maybe you undercharge, okay, your sales. Okay, you undercharge, undercount the item. So now you issue a debit note, okay, to put in the additional charges on that. So the last, refund notes. Refund notes basically is a document to issue by the supplier to confirm the refund amount, okay, to the buyer. So refund notes is a document that, let's say the supplier have to refund money to the buyer, right? Have to return money to the buyer, then they issue refund notes. What is the difference between the refund notes and the credit notes? You can see refund notes basically involve the physical money. Okay, when you return money to your buyer, you issue a refund note. When you, let's say, giving up discount but not giving out the money, maybe you give discount, then you issue a credit note. Okay. So next, what is the offenses? What is the penalty? Let's say if the company accidentally do not comply with the e-invoice. Okay. All right, under section 210(1)(d) of Income Tax Act 1967, a fine of not less than 200 or not more than 20,000 or even imprisonment for not exceeding 6 months or both will be imposed on the taxpayer on the below 3 situation. Okay, only on the below 3 situation. So first thing is to failure to enter and submit e-invoice. Okay, you do not issue e-invoice basically. The next is failure to issue a self-bill e-invoice. You're supposed to issue a self-bill e-invoice, right, and submit to the IRB for validation, but you do not do that, so it's an offense. The last one, failure to failure of the supplier to submit a consolidated transaction e-invoice. So you are supposed to submit a consolidated e-invoice at the end of the month, but again, you do not do that. It's an offense as well. Okay. So you look at it, it covered the e-invoice, it covered the self-bill e-invoice, it covered the consolidated e-invoice. Basically already almost everything in the e-invoice. Okay, you do not do that and you subject to a fine. Correct? So this fine, 200 or not more than 20,000 is per piece of invoice. Okay, I repeat that. So the fine, okay, 200 or not more than 20,000 is per item, per piece. Let's say in 1 month, you have 10 pieces of invoice. You do not issue e-invoice. Then, for example, 200 fine, the minimum fine being imposed, okay, then you kena 20,000 already. Okay, this is what they mean by the penalty. It's per piece of invoice. All right. Next, e-invoice implementation timeline. In the previous budget announcement, our Prime Minister, they do announce that e-invoice will be mandatory for the taxpayer with the annual turnover or revenue exceeding 100 billion from 1st August 2024. Okay, this is what that means. So basically in e-invoice era, there's 4 phases. First is on the pilot phase, which already over. And then next is on the phase 1, which is also over. It's supposed to already started in 1st August 2024. And the phase 2 on the 1st January 2025, another 3 months more to go. And the last phase is on 1st July 2025. All right. So for the pilot phase, which already over in the May 2024. So basically it's to develop the e-invoice system and the infrastructure, okay, to conduct the testing and the functionality, okay, of the system, whether it works or not, okay, whether does it ready for the public to use or not. Okay, basically it's a testing, it's a pilot test. Okay, when turned to phase 1 at the 1st August 2024, it's a mandatory implementation, so you cannot choose. It's not a choice, all right? It's a mandatory implementation for the taxpayer with annual turnover or revenue of more than 100 million. So for those big corporations, okay, who revenue or turnover more than 100 million, you have already started your e-invoice implementation, okay? You already started issue the e-invoice. All right, for the phase 2, on 1st January 2025, okay, another 3 more months to go. So it's a mandatory implementation for the taxpayer with annual turnover 25 million and above, okay? So let's say your annual turnover is 25 million and above, you need to get ready your e-invoice implementation, which you're going to start on 1st January 2025, all right? Last, the phase 3, on 1st July 2025, it applies to all other taxpayers who are below 25 million, basically, okay? You need to start your e-invoice implementation on 1st July 2025, okay? So just like I mentioned, for the micro SME who are below revenue below 150,000 in a year, are totally exempted from e-invoice. You do not need to do e-invoice, totally exempted, okay? So how do we define whether this 100 million, 25 million, how much revenue, okay? How do IRB look at it? So IRB already mentioned that they will take the year 2022 figure based on audited report. So let's say the company, you have audited report, you look at your year 2022, the revenue captured in the audited report, okay? The turnover captured in the audited report to define whether you are in phase 1, phase 2, or phase 3. So let's say those organizations where do not have audited report, okay, they are under exempted exemption category. So what they do, look at your Form C, okay, for the business, for the corporation, you submitted your Form C, okay. For the individual conducting business, you submit your Form B, you submit your Form P, etc. So look at it, okay. What is the revenue that you captured in the form? That will define you are fall under phase 1, phase 2, or phase 3. Okay, I repeat. So it refers to year 2022 audited report or the tax return form, okay, the revenue captured on that, to define whether you are fall under phase 1, okay, phase 2, or phase 3. All right, so this is a summarize of the timeline. So for the first one, 1st August 2024, is the compulsory implementation for the taxpayer with a turnover 100 million and above. Okay. The next phase, 1st January 2025, is for the taxpayer with a turnover 25 million up to 100 million. Okay. Turnover 25 million and above. Okay, you fall under phase 2, which is 1st January 2025. And the last phase, 1st July 2025, it applies to all other taxpayers who conduct business. Again, if you conduct business, you have to issue tax invoice. If you do not conduct business, you do not need to issue tax invoice. All right. So e-invoice model. So how do we do e-invoice? Basically, the IRB already given two options for us, for the business owner, okay, to decide which one you want to use. First is on the portal. IRB they do a portal which is called My Invoice Portal, okay, hosted by IRB. You can use that to issue invoice, or you can issue invoice through application programming interface, the API. Okay. So taxpayer, you may select the mechanism which is suitable you most, okay, to issue the e-invoice. Whether you want to issue in the My Invoice Portal or even you want to issue in your accounting system. Okay. So in order for the taxpayer, in order for the businesses to choose whether you want to issue which mechanism is better for you, whether it's My Invoice Portal or through the API. So we do a comparison here. So you look at the key feature for the My Invoice Portal. Okay, the portal basically enables the individual business owner to generate the invoice, okay, through the portal. And you can even give the option to do the batch generation of invoice. Okay, you can do a bulk upload through the spreadsheet. But do you think that you need to consider this? Was this My Invoice Portal accessible to all the taxpayers? So you need to take note on that. And it may not be that efficient for the large volume of data. Let's say if you have a lot of invoices daily, okay, in and out, so it may not that efficient for you. Okay. So the next API. So API enable the business to very convenient to remit a high volume of transaction of an invoice. Okay. So you have your own accounting system that have API that able to link to IRB. So it will be giving you a very convenient option to issue the invoice. Okay. Of course, the thing that you need to consider is it requires the upfront capital injection in technology or maybe adjustment to your current system. For example, you have an accounting system in currently, okay, you have an accounting system. So you need to check with your system provider. Do they provide e-invoice module? Okay. Do they done their development in the API? Okay, that it enable for their user to issue the e-invoice. If they do, then you might need to top up to add on the e-invoice module. Okay, so there's some spending on that. So let's say if they do not, then you might need to consider to change your accounting software that with API function able to issue e-invoice. That is what we mean by require the upfront capital injection. You need to some upfront investment on that, on the technology. Okay. So this is good for those large taxpayer or maybe the businesses with a substantial transaction volume. So you have a lot of transaction, so it will be easier for you to use your own accounting system with API. Okay. All right, next, the overview of e-invoice workflow. How does e-invoice works basically? Okay, look at this picture. So you can see there is 6 steps. Let's start with the first one. Okay, number 1, issuance of an e-invoice. So when the sales of a transaction is made, okay, the supplier have to create an e-invoice and share it to the IRB, whether through the IRB My Invoice Portal or through the API that we mentioned just now. For what? Why is IRB need your invoice? So basically it's for validation. Okay, IRB need to validate the invoice. Moving forward, IRB need to validate your invoice before you send out to your to your customer. Okay, so you need to create the invoice and then send out to the IRB through My Invoice Portal for the validation. Next, number 2, validate of e-invoice. So IRB will validate the invoice in a near real-time system method. Okay, so IRB already confirmed that they will take 2 seconds. Okay, 2 seconds to validate your invoice. So the moment you key in the invoice, okay, you press enter to send it to the IRB for validation. It only takes you 2 seconds. So immediately you press the next enter. In the next second, the invoice will come back already. Okay, with validated. Okay, it tells you being validated. All right. This is to ensure that the e-invoice has met all the criteria and the standards that IRB required. All right. Once the invoice being validated, the supplier will receive a unique identified number. Okay, a unique identification number through the portal or through the API. Okay, you will be able to see there's a QR code in the invoice. Okay, so back to the example that I showed just now in the TMB bill, you will be able to see that is a QR code. Okay, you can scan and see whether this invoice has been validated or not. All right, so it is given there. So what is the purpose of this unique identification number? So this is for the IRB to trace the invoice in the future. Okay, the unique identification number will allow the IRB traceability and to reduce the work. Okay, so moving forward, everything will be through the e-invoice. So number 3, notification of the validated e-invoice. So how do I know whether the invoice that I received has been validated or not? So the IRB will inform both supplier and the buyer. Okay, once the e-invoice has been validated through the portal and the API. Okay, so the IRB will inform. So how IRB will inform us? So let's say today I go and perform a purchase. Okay, I request for e-invoice. So how IRB inform me that that invoice is a e-invoice? So you will send an email. I do receive an email for my purchase. So in the e-invoice format. Okay, so IRB will inform you, send an email. So let's say even though the supplier do not share the invoice to the customer where they are supposed to do, okay, IRB will still inform them. So they will know where that the customer saying that, oh, I do not receive your invoice. Okay. Number 4, sharing of invoice. Upon validation, the supplier is obligated to share the invoice to the buyer, to share the validated invoice to the buyer. Okay. So the QR code on the invoice will be allowed the buyer to scan and check the status of the e-invoice. Number 5, rejection or cancellation of e-invoice. So upon issue of an e-invoice within a stipulated period of time, so the buyer can request to cancel, the buyer can request to reject, okay, the e-invoice, to cancel the e-invoice. And the supplier is the one to perform the cancellation. I repeat, within the special timeline, okay, basically it's 72 hours. So once the invoice issued and validated, within 72 hours, the buyer can request to reject the invoice. Why the buyer have to request to reject the invoice? Basically, maybe there's some error on the invoice, or maybe the quantity wrong, okay, maybe the decision wrong. So the buyer can request to reject the invoice. So who is the one to perform the rejection? Who is the one to perform the cancellation? The supplier. Okay, you can see here. So the buyer is the one to request to cancel, and the supplier is the one to cancel it. So the buyer cannot cancel. All right. So once the buyer see the invoice, there's some error on that. So the buyer cannot cancel. The buyer can only request the supplier to cancel it, and the supplier will perform the cancellation. Okay, cancel the old invoice and issue the new invoice. Of course, same like the current practice, the cancellation or invoice must be with reason, okay, with justification. You cannot simply cancel the invoice, right? So must be with reason. Plus, supplier and the buyer will be able to obtain a summary of a e-invoice transaction through the portal. So you can get a summary of that. Okay, since all our sales, purchases, expenses is shared with IRB, so what about data security and data protection? Okay, so my invoice system is designed by IRB with the necessary network and security monitoring tools to ensure that our data security is protected. Okay, the data security and the data privacy is protected. So there are some of the key steps that IRB promised that they were going to do in order to protect our data. First one, IRB will assess the data protection needs. Before they start to monitoring and the auditing process, okay, they will identify the type of data that they collect, okay, the process in the system. Second, implementation of data protection control in order to protect the e-invoice data for leaking out, okay, or being hacked, okay, for unauthorized access, being modified, okay, being disclosed to the public. So IRB will implement the appropriate technical and the organization control. One, they will perform the monitoring and auditing of the system. Okay, they will audit the data protection system. How is the performance? Okay. After the audit, based on the result, so they will continue monitor and improve the data protection practice to address all the gap or maybe the weaknesses, okay, or maybe any room for improvement. So this four is the steps that promised by the IRB that they're going to do in order to protect our data. All right, next. So after we talk about all the timeline, after we talk about who is supposed to involve in the e-invoice implementation, so let's look at how are you getting ready for your e-invoice implementation in the organization. First, you need to allocate and equip the personnel with the necessary capacity to adopt and oversee the implementation of e-invoice. So first of all, you need to get ready the staff, maybe your accounting staff who have a basic understanding of e-invoice, okay, to capable to adopt and oversee the implementation. All right. First is on the human. So the second is on the equipment. Okay. That means the availability of data sources and structure. Your current IT capacity, does it able to support the system readiness? Okay. You need to get ready your system. You need to get ready your computer. Okay. You need to get ready your infrastructure. All right. Last. So you review your current practice in issuing transaction documents. So currently, how do you issue your invoice? How do you issue your debit note, credit note, and the refund notes? Okay, how do you deal with refund? So when necessary, you might need to have some SOP on that. Okay, you might need to set some SOP on moving forward. How do we deal with invoice? How do we issue invoice? So who is supposed to issue invoice? Okay, what is the data you are supposed to collect in order for you to issue an e-invoice? Okay, so you need to get ready these 3 points. Next, list of the required field in e-invoice. You look at the number 35 and number 20. So total 55 of column or 55 field that you need to fill in into your e-invoice. Okay, I repeat. So moving forward in your e-invoice, there's total 55 field that you need to fill up in your e-invoice. Okay, so moving forward, issue an invoice, you need to fill up 55 items. So what are the items on all these 55 items? So there's 8 categories. So the first one on the party. Okay, there's 2 items on the party and both 2 items are compulsory. Okay, it's a mandatory. Second, on the supplier details. On total got 7 items and out of it, 6 items is mandatory. Next is buyer detail. 4 items and 3 is mandatory. Following, next is address. 2, both are mandatory. The same 2 contact number, also 2, both are mandatory. And the next is invoice detail. Total of 10 items, and out of it, 8 is mandatory. So product detail or the services detail, 21 items, and 12 is mandatory. And the last is payment info. Total 7 items. It's optional, right? So total 55 items. Out of it, 35 is a mandatory item for you to fill up. You must get the details for the 35 items. Okay, and the 20 is optional. Whether you want to put in or you don't put in is up to you. All right, this is a 55 item that I mentioned just now. So first one is on the party, basically the supplier name, and the buyer name is a mandatory. So the next supplier team, supplier registration number. Okay, let's say the supplier, let's say your organization is a Sanjuan Berhad, your SSN number, you have to include it. Supplier SST registration number. Let's say the supplier yourself is a SST registrar, so you have to put in your SST registration number. It's a mandatory field. Okay, so tourism tax registration. So for those, let's say in hotel operator, okay, they are tourism tax registrar, so they have to put in their registration number. It's a mandatory. So supplier email is optional. You want to put, you can put, or you don't want, you can just leave it. Supplier MSIC code is a mandatory. So many people may ask, so what is MSIC code? So MSIC code basically is a 5-digit number to describe the business activity that you are in. Okay, I repeat, MSIC code basically is a 5-digit number to indicate what is the business activity that you are doing. All right. So where can I find my MSIC code? So basically, if you are a Sdn Bhd, you submitted your yearly income tax return. Okay, look at it. Look at your Form C. We do put in the MSIC code there. Okay, to describe your business activity. Okay, so refer to your income tax return form. You will be able to find your MSIC code. Okay, number 9, business activity decision. So you need to put in your company is in which industry. Okay, just a simple decision. You do not need to put in the long decision. All right, just a simple one sentence will do. Okay, next, the buyer detail. So number 10, the buyer TIN. So what is TIN? Okay, you look at the previous one, you need to put in your supplier TIN and you need to put in your buyer TIN. So what is TIN? TIN basically is tax identification number. Okay, so your tax number. Let's say if it's a Sdn Bhd, it is your C number. So if it's an individual, it is your IG number. Again, if you refer back to your income tax return form, you will be able to find your tax identification number. Okay, so the buyer registration or identification. Let's say your buyer is a corporate, you put in their SSM number is a must, or your buyer is an individual, you put in their IC number. Okay, it's a compulsory. So buyer SSC registration number if they are, and buyer email again is optional. So moving forward, when you conduct a transaction with your buyer, you need to get their PIN number, you need to get their IC number, you need to get their SSC registration number in order for you to issue a e-invoice. Next, address. So your supplier address and your buyer address is a compulsory. And the contact number, supplier contact number, and the buyer contact number again is compulsory. Okay, you have to put in. All right. The next is invoice detail. So e-invoice version. So your current e-invoice is in which version you have to put in. So e-invoice type. So the e-invoice, whether it's an invoice or it's a credit note or debit note, okay, you need to put down e-invoice code and the number, original e-invoice reference number. This is basically applied for those, let's say like credit note and debit note. You need to put down your original invoice number, okay? And your date and the time is very important. You need to have your e-invoice date. You need to have your e-invoice time, all right? And the currency code, whether it's in US dollar, whether it's in RM, okay, you need to put down, and the exchange rate, okay? Again, it's mandatory field. So let's say you have a transaction with a foreigner, so you need to put out the currency code and the exchange rate. So the frequency of billing period is optional. Next, the product details or the services detail. You look at it, this page is all indicate all the mandatory field. So it's a must to put in. Okay. Classification. What is the classification of the product or the services? Basically, IRB they have a guide. I don't go through in detail for this classification. If you want to know more, you can look at the guide. So IRB do list out all the classification of that. Okay. And the decision, the unit price, the tax type, tax rate, tax amount. If there is a tax exemption, the detail, okay, and the amount on that, the subtotal and the total include tax, total exclude tax are all mandatory field. Okay, you need to put in. So total net amount is optional, and the total payable amount is mandatory. Okay, you have to include it. Next is the rounding. Okay, total tax amount, taxable amount, and the quality measurement, discount rate, discount amount. Okay, the fee charge, the fee amount, the fee rate. Okay, is a optional field. All right, you can choose to put or you can choose to ignore. Also can. The last seven is on the payment information. Okay, it's an optional field. The payment mode, the supplier bank account number, payment terms, the prepaid amount, prepayment date, okay, prepayment reference number, and the bill reference number. All these are optional. Okay, you can choose to put or you can choose not to put. All right. Next, we have 12 additional field for certain transaction that you need to put in. Again, this one you do not put it in your e-invoice, but you put it under the initial. All right. So you look at the 4 items here in the screen. So shipment recipient name, the shipping recipient address, okay, the TIN number, and the registration number. But this is optional. You can choose put or you can choose not to put also can. For those import and export. So this one, number 5 is a mandatory. If you are doing import or export of goods, then this column is a mandatory for you. You have to put in, all right, the reference number of the custom form. Okay, you need to put in. So number 6, the Incoterm, the tariff code, okay, the FTA information, and so on and so forth. It's optional. You can choose to put or you can choose not to put also can. All right. Okay, now we enter into consolidated e-invoice. What is consolidated e-invoice? So IRB allowed the taxpayer, the supplier, to do a consolidated e-invoice with the buyer who do not require an e-invoice as a proof of residences into a consolidated e-invoice on a monthly basis. So in other words, let's say for those B2C business operation, okay, your buyer, okay, they do not require the e-invoice as a proof of expenses for tax purpose, then you can just issue a normal invoice to them, a normal receipt, and at the end of the month, you do a consolidated e-invoice and submit to IRB for validation, okay, on monthly basis. So you cannot do quarterly, you cannot do bi-monthly, you cannot do half-yearly, okay? It's on monthly basis. You need to submit your consolidated e-invoice. Okay, so buyer will not be able to use the normal receipt for the tax purpose. So back to the personal tax relief that I mentioned just now, the lifestyle relief. So in future, let's say if I were to buy a mobile phone or I to buy a laptop, if I getting a normal receipt, a normal invoice, but it's not an e-invoice, I cannot use it to claim my tax relief. Okay, I must get a tax invoice in order for me to get a tax deduction for any other transaction as well. Okay, you must get a tax invoice in order for you to claim a tax deduction. Okay, look at this diagram. So this is how it works. So we go to scenario 1. Okay, in the scenario 1, let's say your supplier obtain the buyer detail, then the supplier will issue and validate the invoice with the IRB. Okay, supplier will key in the invoice, okay, and send it to IRB for validation. How long IRB will take to validate your invoice? I mentioned just now, that will take you 2 seconds, okay, to validate your invoice. So number 3, supplier will share the validated invoice to your buyer. Okay, supplier will share the validated invoice to your buyer, whether virtual or in the printer format, also can. Number 4, the buyer may scan the QR code, okay, on the invoice in order for he or her to check the status on the invoice, whether it's validated or not. Okay, and the last, buyer will be able to use the invoice for tax purpose. Okay, the example just now I mentioned, to claim a tax deduction or even to claim a tax relief, you will need a tax invoice. All right, so look at scenario number 2. Okay, so for scenario number 2, the supplier will issue a normal invoice to the buyer if the buyer do not require the e-invoice. Okay, moving forward, when you conduct purchases, so the supplier will ask you, do you need the e-invoice? If you don't need, they will just issue you a normal receipt, like what we're doing now. Okay, number 2, supplier will consolidate all the receipts on a monthly basis and submit to IRB for validation purpose. So moving forward, supplier will do one more step. Okay, for those buyer do not require the e-invoice. So the supplier have to consolidate all the receipts on a monthly basis every month, submit to IRB for validation purpose. All right. Okay. So the supplier issue the supplier issue the normal receipts to the buyer if they do not require e-invoice. And the buyer may still request for an e-invoice from the supplier within a month of a transaction. Okay, for example, let's say on the 15th of September, the buyer conduct a purchase. Okay, they just take the normal receipt, do not take an e-invoice. So up to within the month of September, up to 30th of September, the buyer still can go back to the supplier to request for an e-invoice. Okay, I repeat. So within the same month, okay, within the month of a transaction, the buyer may still anytime request for an e-invoice, and the supplier have to furnish it. So let's say back to the example that I mentioned just now, 15 September, conduct purchases, but up to 1st October, then only the buyer go and request an e-invoice. Okay, on 1st October, then only the buyer go back and request an e-invoice. So in this situation, the supplier actually do not need to give them because it's already exceeded. Okay, already exceeded the month. All right, item number 2, supplier consolidate all the invoices and submit to the IRB for validation monthly basis. Okay, so the supplier have to aggregate all the transaction on a monthly basis. Okay, remember, bear in mind, every month you have to submit it. So you cannot do it bi-monthly, you cannot do it half yearly, or you cannot even do it monthly, yearly. Okay, you have to do it on a monthly basis. So by when you need to submit to the IRB? IRB say that within the 7 calendar days after the month end. I take an example. Let's say consolidated e-invoice for the month of September. You have to submit to IRB for validation latest by 7th of October. Okay, so for consolidated e-invoice, you have to submit to the IRB latest by 7 calendar days after the month end. Right? So the step number 3, IRB issue and validate the invoice with consolidated e-invoice with the IRB. So what do you put it into your consolidated e-invoice for the details? IRB already given the standard wording, okay, that you need to put in. So for the buyer team in your invoice, in your consolidated e-invoice, you put in E10010. Okay, this is a standard words that you need to put in your buyer team. So for the buyer name, you put in general public. Again, it's a standard wording. So you cannot like put in others. You cannot like put in NA, things like that. You must put general public. So other buyer detail, you put NA. Right. So the IRB already say that the supplier is allowed to adopt one of the ways in the below 2 methods. You can choose one. Okay. The number 1 is to summarize all the receipts in a separate item, separate line item. So you itemize it line by line. So number 2 is the list of recipient in a, let's say your receipt is a continuous number, okay, no jumping. So you can present it in one item or two, okay. Note that all the receipt reference number are required to be included. So you need to put in all your receipts reference number, or your bill number, okay, in order for IRB to identify the item. Okay, next. Consolidation does not apply to self-bill e-invoice. So for self-bill e-invoice, you need to do one by one. Okay, except for these 3 situations, you can do a consolidated. Okay, so what are the situations? So first, acquisition of goods or services from individual taxpayer. So you can do a consolidated self-bill. Number 2, invoice payment to the public at large. So number 3 is the claim or the insurance claim, insurance compensation. Okay, you can do a consolidated. So for consolidated e-invoice, does there any limitation on that? Okay, or you can do as many as you can. So basically, IRB said that there is some limitation. Okay, you need to fulfill. So maximum size for submission is 5 MB. So maximum you can only submit up to 5 MB per submission. Okay, maximum 100 pieces of e-invoice per submission. Let's say you have 150 pieces of e-invoice for the month. You need to split it into 2 transactions already. Right? So maximum size per invoice is 300 KP. So with this, you can actually split your receipts into a couple of invoice. let's say if you cannot fulfill this three already over the maximum size, okay, you can just split it. All right. So basically, this is a summary, the 3 points that you need to bear in mind for the consolidated e-invoice. So number 1, the supplier will issue a normal receipts, normal bill to the buyer. Same as a current practice. Let's say your buyer do not need the e-invoice, but that particular receipts or bill, okay, or invoices do not have to submit to the IRB for validation because it's just a normal invoice, and the buyer cannot claim it as a for tax deduction, right? So number 2, supplier is allowed to aggregate the transaction with a buyer and submit it to the IRB for validation purpose on a monthly basis. Okay, supplier have to submit your consolidated invoice to IRB on a monthly basis, and the deadline is by 7 calendar days after the month end. All right, I repeat, the deadline is by 7 calendar days after the month end. Okay, so number 3, you can choose one of the way to submit your consolidated invoice. Either you itemize it, okay, line by line, or you put it into the one item in a single line item if your receipts are all in continuous number. Okay, if there's no jumping number, you can do in a single line item. Okay. So next, what is the activity that not allowed to do consolidated e-invoice? You must do a individual e-invoice. You cannot do consolidate. So IRB basically spell out there's a few of industry or a few of activity that cannot use consolidated. Okay, you must do normal e-invoice. You cannot do consolidated. First one is automotive, buy or sell of any kind of a motor vehicle. Okay, any kind of motor vehicle in automotive, then you need to do a single e-invoice. Second, aviation, selling of a flight ticket, Asia, for example, okay, they cannot do consolidated e-invoice. Number 3, luxury goods and jewelry. Okay, the detail of it is not announced yet, so the IRB will announce in the future. Okay, so buying of selling of luxury goods or jewelry, all right, cannot do consolidated, have to do single e-invoice. Okay, next, construction. Okay, and the wholesaler or retailer of construction material, you cannot use consolidated e-invoice as well. And number 6, license betting and gaming. So the payout to the winner cannot do consolidated e-invoice. And last, payment to agent, dealer, and distribution cannot do consolidated e-invoice. Okay, so there's total 7 industry that cannot use consolidated e-invoice. Okay, there's total 7 industry cannot use a consolidated e-invoice. They have to issue a normal e-invoice. They have to get ready all the information that I showed just now. Okay, let me drink the water. Okay, next. What is the treatment for the staff benefit? Okay, for the staff perquisite. Let's say the staff incurred some business expenses on behalf of a company. So what is the treatment? Basically, go to the general rules. You will see that employee is required to request for the e-invoice to be issued on the employer name for the business expenses. Okay. I repeat, basically, employee have to request for the e-invoice to be issued on the employer name, okay, for the business expenses. But I think it is also very common that sometimes it's not every supplier that can give a e-invoice on the different name. Okay, with that, IRB given concession. Okay, IRB given some concession on the e-invoice to be issued to the employees. All right. So first, businesses is allowed to use the e-invoice issued on the name of employee. Okay, or other existing supporting document to be issued by the supplier to support the particular transaction. So in other words, now with the concession for the employee who incurred some business expenses on behalf of a company, they can still getting the e-invoice as long as it's an e-invoice, okay? They can still getting the e-invoice on the employee name to claim for tax, okay, as a proof of expenses for tax purpose. So the second concession will be for the foreign supplier bill or for the foreign supplier receipts will be accepted as a proof of expenses. You do not need to issue a self-bill for yourself, okay? In the event that the employee paid the expenses incurred overseas. Let's say, for example, your company, okay, the manager of a company go to overseas to meet the client. They incurred accommodation, they incurred entertainment, for example. So you can just bring back the bill and then you can claim it as a company expenses, as a proof of expense. Do not need to issue a self-bill, do not need to get an e-invoice because it's in overseas. You are unable to get an e-invoice as well, all right? So for the payment to foreign supplier, if it's per receipt and the benefit are stated in the employer handbook, employer policy. So the company, you must have an employee handbook stated that what is the benefit that given, okay? Identify it, all right? So with that, if an employee incur the expenses, okay, on the foreign supplier, then you can claim the expenses as a proof of expense for tax purpose, right? This is only applied to foreign supplier, happen overseas, okay? All right, we have covered consolidated e-invoice. So next, we move into the next topic, the self-bill invoice, okay? What is self-bill invoice? So these are the circumstances that allow to issue a self-bill e-invoice, okay? First is payment to the agent, payment to dealer, payment to distributor. Number two, goods or services rendered by the foreign supplier. Okay, number three, profit distribution, e-commerce, payout of the betting and the gaming winner. You're allowed to do a self-bill. Number six, transaction with the individual who are not conducting business, interest payment, and the insurance compensation if you receive it. All right. So total 8 situations that you are allowed to do a self-bill invoice. So self-bill invoice is only applied for this 8 situation. So you cannot be like simply, let's say, for example, your supplier do not give you an invoice and you do a self-bill for yourself. So cannot. Okay, it's out of this 8 situation already. Only the 8 situation here, stated here, allowed to do a self-bill. All right, next. So what do you do with the e-commerce transaction? So let's say you purchase something from Lazada, you purchase something from Shopee. So what do you do? So e-commerce transaction means any sales or purchase of goods and services conduct over any network by the method specifically designed for the purpose of receiving or even placing an order. In other words, means Shopee or Lazada, all right? It's an online platform for you to place order to perform a purchase. Okay, so e-commerce platform provider is responsible to issue the e-invoice, to issue a receipt for you. Okay, I repeat, e-commerce platform provider, the Shopee or the Lazada, is responsible to issue the e-invoice or issue a receipt for you. Let's say if you buy something from Shopee, for example. So after the transaction complete, after the goods being delivered to you, okay, you will see in your apps, in the Shopee apps, there's a column saying that asking you whether you need a tax e-invoice or not. If you need, then you press. Okay, you start filling up the info. If you don't need, you may just leave it. Okay, they give an option to you whether you need an e-invoice. If yes, you click in and you start filling up your info. They will generate the invoice for you. If you do not need, you may just leave it. Okay, so in other words, the merchant actually do not need to provide the goods to the purchaser. Okay, it's the e-commerce platform provider is the one to provide the e-invoice. Okay, so this is this diagram explain how e-invoice work. So like for example, in number one, let's say me and you as a purchaser, we place order in the platform. So the platform will inform the merchant to send the goods, okay? And then at the same time, the logistic will pick up the goods and deliver to you. So in this situation, who is the one to issue the e-invoice to you? It's an e-commerce platform, okay? It's an e-commerce platform to issue the invoice to you, but not the merchant. Okay, so next. This is some of the general tip that you need to bear in mind. In the future, you'll be always need to use that. Number one, the E10010 is a general public tip. Okay, E10010 is a general public tip. You need to use it when you look at the next box. You need to use it in the three situations. First, when the buyer team in the e-invoice for Malaysian, okay, they only give you my card number. Okay, for Malaysian, okay, let's say like me and you, we conduct a purchase, so we do not bring our team. Okay, we only got the my card number, so we use that. You use this general team to represent the team number. Okay, number two, in a consolidated e-invoice, I show you just now. In a consolidated e-invoice, okay, you need to put in this number in the general team. Okay, number three, supplier team number in a consolidated e-invoice as well. You need to put in this number. Okay, item 2, E10020, okay, for the foreign buyer team number. Let's say in certain situation you do not get the foreign buyer team number, okay, it's not provided, all right, then you put in this number. Number 3, E10030, okay, for the foreign supplier team number. Let's say when you do your self-bill, you do not get your foreign supplier team number, it's not available, okay, it's not provided, then you use this as a general foreign supplier team number. Last, number 4, E10040 as a buyer team. Okay, you use it. You use this buyer team to involve the below person. Let's say the B2G. You look at it, you will see the government, the state government, the local authority, government authority, and so on. Okay, basically, it's for those B2G business operation. Then you use this number as a buyer team. All right. So very soon we come to our last topic of today, the latest LHDN update, the latest IRB update in terms of e-invoice. All right, so you look at the box, you will see that there is 6 months grace period. So what does this mean? So IRB has announced that a 6-month interim relaxation period, a 6-month grace period, start from 1st August 2024 for the business to be aligned with the e-invoice implementation. So look at it. You will see the phase 1. Their 6-month grace period will be start from 1st August 2024 to 31st January 2025. So for the phase 2, from 1st January 2025 to 30th June 2025. And for the phase 3, will be from 1st July 2025 to 31st December 2025. So what is this grace period means? What is the benefit given in this grace period? Okay, so there's 3 things. So number 1, the taxpayer can submit a consolidated e-invoice for all the transactions applicable across all industry, include self-bill transaction. Okay. Number 1 is the taxpayer in these 6 months, you can submit a consolidated e-invoice for all transactions across all industry, include the industry that I covered just now. All right. You can do a consolidated e-invoice in the 6-month time, in the first 6 months after your implementation. Okay. Number 2, taxpayer is allowed to include any transaction description in the product or services description field. Okay, because IRB, they do have some standard wording that you need to put in your product and the service description and the code and so on. In these 6 months, IRB is saying that taxpayer, you are allowed to put in any wording on that. All right. Number 3, so taxpayer are not required to issue an individual e-invoice or even a self-bill for each transaction, even if your counterparty requests for it. Okay. After you implement your e-invoice on the first 6 months, even your purchaser, they request for an e-invoice, but you may not be required to issue to them because you're still under the grace period. Okay, for the first 6 months. All right. So during the 6-month interim relaxation period, IRB has introduced the below with the intention to grant the taxpayer a sufficient time. They give you a 6-month relaxation time, okay, to implement, to get ready the e-invoice. All right, IRB already said that they already confirmed. First, there is no penalty. All right, there is no penalty for the businesses during the first 6 months. Okay, they won't charge you penalty if you do not issue an e-invoice. They won't charge you penalty if you just issue a consolidated e-invoice on the first 6 months, the relaxation time. Okay. Next, they're given certain incentive for the company to be compliant with. Okay. They reduce the claim period of a capital allowance. Okay, the CA. Okay, right. For the IT equipment, you can claim your capital allowance. So they reduce the claim period from 3 years to 2 years. All right. Only for the 2 years time, year assessment, 2024 and 2025. Only for the ICT equipment incurred in this 2 years time, okay, you can get your capital allowance to be finished claim in a shorter period. All right, in 2 years time. Okay, basically, this is the incentive that given by the IRB. Okay, I summarize it into 3 items. So first is a digitalization grant. IRB given a grant up to 5,000 to the SME to upgrade their sales system, their inventory system, or their accounting system. Okay, a 5,000 grant given by the IRB. So this one you have to apply it. Next is on the capital allowance. Reduce it from currently, let's say the ICT equipment, we will finish claim the capital allowance in 4 years time. Okay, in the budget 2024, they announced it to further reduce to 3 years. And in the recent update, they further reduce it to 2 years time. You can finish claim. All right, in the previous slide, okay, that I showed you just now. Last is on the tax deduction. So a tax deduction up to 50,000 for each year assessment will be granted on the ESG related expenses, include consultancy fee for implementation of e-invoice by the SME. All right. IRB, in order to encourage the SME to implement their e-invoice in the company, so they given its ESG related expenses tax deduction. From year 2024 to year assessment 2027, each year can get up to 50,000 deduction, okay, in your tax return. All right, when you incur for the ESG related expenses. Okay, basically, we come to our end of today's seminar, and thank you everyone for being with us until now.